Hey guys, can everybody hear me okay? All right. Thank you for coming out here tonight. My name's Slava. I'm one of the co-founders of the company called RethinkDB. I'll tell you a little bit about that, but I'm really here today to talk about a really cool project we're working on called Horizon. And the story is, just by show of hands, how many people are familiar with RethinkDB, like heard about it before? Okay, quite a few of you, not everybody. Let's give a quick background. RethinkDB is a real-time NoSQL database system. It's similar to MongoDB if you're getting started, if you've used that before, in the sense that you store and retrieve JSON documents. You can scale it out to multiple machines, multiple data centers. But that's pretty much where the similarities end. Rethink is a real-time database. The way it works is you subscribe to queries. So you say, I'm interested in this piece of data. And then anytime something changes in the database, you as a developer, application developer, get a notification. And what that does is it makes building modern real-time apps really, really simple. It dramatically simplifies the architecture and the infrastructure. So we launched the production version of RethinkDB about a year ago. And right now, RethinkDB is deployed in a lot of infrastructures at scale. It's deployed, for example, at NASA, at Fidelity, where they use Rethink to basically back the mobile app that about 30 million of their customers use every day to manage their accounts. It's deployed at General Motors. It's deployed in a lot of places. And my story is, the reason why I'm here tonight is, as we built RethinkDB, we shipped it, we started getting users. We have a great community of about 150,000 developers now, and it's growing, growing every month very fast. So we started working with these companies and people who are building modern real-time web applications. And one of the things we learned is that just by observing lots of different companies, lots of different people from different kind of backgrounds and walks of life, build their apps, ask questions, get the database working and get their apps working. The most important thing we learned is that Node.js and JavaScript in general is really, really exciting. A lot of people are moving to JavaScript and Node just because of all the asynchronous kind of real-time features. It's fast, it's relatively easy. There are a lot of people who know JavaScript. So that's great. But kind of the second part of it is that building real-time or modern JavaScript apps is still too hard. There's kind of a lot of stuff you have to do and a lot of stuff you have to know to make that happen. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And the idea behind Horizon is to build an ecosystem, a project, a set of tools that makes building modern apps much easier. Okay, so let's say you're building a JavaScript app. What do you have to do? It turns out that if you're just starting from scratch, there's a ton of things that you have to just deal with that have really nothing to do with your application. It's just kind of boilerplate work. So you have to set up the database. You have to set up your web server. You have to write some pretty basic code. You're doing the same thing over and over again to create the endpoints. You're probably building your front-end piece of code in React or Angular. And then, okay, so you built your app, then you have to deploy it. And deployment is another big problem because you could do it pretty easily. There are a lot of services now to get things deployed, for a simple app. But the moment you get things to work at scale, like a lot of our customers did, things just get hard. You can do it on AWS, but again, AWS is a set of building blocks. It's amazing, but there's a lot you have to do to actually get things working. You could do it on Heroku. You could do it, you could do it in lots of places, but deployment and scale is another big problem. Then you have to deal with monitoring. You have to deal with a lot of these issues. So these issues kind of span from just developing your app to maintaining it, to deploying it, to scaling it, to monitoring, just all across the development process. And so, okay, we have this problem. How do people do this now? Well, right now you have three options. There's probably more options, but there's three major ones that at least a lot of our users, probably 90% of our users, pick. So one is you could build stuff from scratch. There's a lot of tools now, like the JavaScript, the Node ecosystem is amazing, the front-end ecosystem is amazing. But these tools, you kind of have to get them and put them all together and figure all this stuff out. They change very quickly. Things break. There's just a lot to do. And similarly, on the deployment side, you could use a cloud provider like Amazon AWS or Azure or whatever it is that you pick. But again, it's great building blocks, but pretty hard to actually do anything, especially at the beginning. Once you get a big app up and running, things are certainly doable and possible, but there's a lot of things that you have to deal with, and it's really, really hard when you're getting started. So people set out to solve that problem. A lot of companies recognized it. So the first one that at least beginners tend to gravitate to is Firebase. And just by show of hands, how many people are familiar with how Firebase works? Okay, almost everybody. Basically, Firebase is now part of Google. It's a service that lets you store and retrieve data. It's real time, so anytime there's a change, there's a push notification that updates all the apps. It's a really, really amazing product, amazing service if you're getting started. But we found that a lot of RethinkDB customers switched to Rethink from Firebase because they started running into problems. And so the first problem is it runs on Google's infrastructure. And if you're a big company, you're not okay with public cloud, you want to do things yourself, you can't. That's kind of a curse or a blessing depending on where you stand. The second issue with Firebase is that it's amazing at what it does, but it's pretty limited. They give you an API that lets you do a couple of things, but when your app gets complicated, you can't really use it anymore. So people end up doing these hacks, like they'll set up another database, sync data between the Firebase and their database, then they'll query the database sometimes when they're doing complicated things. They use Firebase at other times, like data diverges, things are hard. And eventually, as the app kind of progresses and becomes more complicated, people just switch off. And another example of this was Parse. Parse was a similar service run by Facebook, had a very similar problem. And because just financially, I mean, as the app gets complicated and people are willing to pay a lot of money to solve their problems, these service-type solutions don't really work out for advanced apps. So Facebook, shut down Parse, partially for this reason. So the third option that people were very excited about is Meteor. And again, by show of hands, how many people are familiar with Meteor? Okay, quite a few of you. So Meteor is an open source project. It's an ecosystem that, again, sets out to solve this problem. And again, people were really, really excited about it. And they tried Meteor and started running into pretty significant issues. And these issues have to do sort of with how Meteor was designed. Again, it's a curse or a blessing depending on how you stand. But basically, Meteor is a pretty monolithic, walled garden. So when you pick it, you're really picking Meteor. Everything you're doing the Meteor way. If you want to scale your app and you run into a problem with Meteor, you can't really use a Node.js library. You can't really do things your own way. It doesn't operate really well with the Node.js ecosystem. And again, if people like that, that's awesome. But our customers, our users, and from our point of view, the world is kind of moving towards open source and this bazaar model versus a cathedral model. And Meteor is much more of a cathedral. So that's what people do today. And a lot of our users kind of are still struggling. So we set out to build this project called Horizon. And the idea behind Horizon was to solve a lot of these problems, to design it a little bit differently, have a different philosophy that will hopefully solve these problems for a lot of people. And Horizon right now is in private betas. We're shipping it in May. So we'll see how well it works out. We're very excited about it. And I'm here today to tell you a little bit about Horizon. I'm going to show you a basic app. We're going to look at some code. It's going to be great. We're going to have fun. All right. So what Horizon is, it's an open source project. You can think of it at the beginning as a self-hosted Firebase. So you download Horizon server in your machine. You spin it up. It gives you a self-hosted backend. And you can just write your React app or your Angular app, whatever it is. And Horizon will deal with all the backend. It will deal with the database. It will deal with the endpoints. So you literally, all you have to do is write front-end code. And then Horizon Cloud is a paid service where you can deploy Horizon apps to the cloud, and you can scale them out, monitor them, do all the typical things that you have to do when you have a pretty serious application. So what's different about Horizon, though, is that we've really thought through what happens when you come out of the stage of a hello world kind of example project and your app gets really complicated, because our customers, the people who really write the big checks, that's their problem. They're really big apps. And the way Horizon works, so when you start out, it's just a server. But as your app gets complicated, the idea is to make it modular and extensible. So everything is built on top of the Node.js ecosystem. You can take out, it offers services like all the typical things you have to deal with in a web app, sessions, authentication, data storage and retrieval, like all these presence, all these things. But then as your app gets complicated, typically what people do right now is they stop running Horizon as a standalone server, and they import it as a library into their Node.js app. So what it does is it gives your Node.js app all these services. So it's kind of scaffolding for your app, and then you can start using whichever ones of them you want. You can throw away the things you don't want. You can import Node.js libraries. Like you're basically building a Node.js app with all this support from Horizon. So what that gets people is, A, they can get started very, very quickly. It's very, very easy to build an app. It's easy to build a modern app because it integrates with React and Angular. So everything's real time. You don't have to write a lot of code. All the kind of boilerplate is taken care of. And as your app gets complicated, there's an upgrade path or extensibility path where we've looked at a lot of infrastructures, how people develop, how people deploy. And the project really works with people, with the way people actually develop, as opposed to enforcing this idea on people, here's how you should build things. Instead, it's just okay, what do people do right now and how can we make their jobs easier? So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to show you a little bit. So I'm going to show you a basic app just to give you an idea of how this works. And we're going to look at some code. So you'll see a little bit about what Horizon, what Horizon gets you and how easy it is to actually use. So I'm going to spin up a Horizon server right now. By the way, can you guys see this? Is this OK? Can everyone see the terminal? OK. So what I'm going to do is, so Horizon, I already have it installed. There's a command called hg. It lets you initialize basic structure of the applications. What I'm going to run right now is hgserve. And hgserve will spin up the Horizon server. So the app I'm going to show you right now is just a chat app. It's built in React. I think this comes from the React people, so it's a basic example of how to build chat applications. And then we're gonna look at the code and see how to actually do this. So let's open this up. I think it starts on localhost 8181. All right, I got the app running right here, and I'm just gonna say hello world, and other people can type here. And you'll see the chat messages. So pretty simple, pretty basic example. All right, so I got two windows here. I just want to give you an example of what I mean by real time, because I used that word before. So if I say foobar here in this window, it shows up in the other window too, right? So this happens instantaneously. That's an example of a real-time app. And the premise behind RethinkDB and Horizon actually is that just like Ajax really changed the game for people, once people introduced Ajax, apps that don't use it, that force you to refresh the page, kind of felt like they're from the 90s. Real-time WebSockets, it's kind of the same magnitude of an innovation, although that may not seem like that big a deal, because once you get an app where data gets pushed to the browser in real time, when people use an app that doesn't have that, it feels like it was made 15 years ago. So this is really, really important. All right, so what I'd like to do now is show you some code. We'll look at how this app is actually built. All right, so the code here is all React. So there are only a couple of lines that use the Horizon API. And I'm going to show you these lines. But everything else here, you don't really have to worry about, because if you go, by the way, how many people are familiar with React or used it before? OK, yeah, if you use React, all of this is standard stuff, so nothing is new here. I'm not going to actually cover it. But you could literally use any web framework, any front-end framework you want with this, and it will work fine. Or you could roll it on your own. So let's look at what Horizon actually does. I'm going to search for the word Horizon. And there are only a couple of lines here that matter. Can you guys see this OK? Sort of? Okay, I'll try to verbally kind of explain what this is. Okay, so the first thing we do is we create a variable, we say horizon equals horizon. That literally just creates the horizon object and imports, a package. This object, so this code will run in the browser. This is front-end JavaScript code. This line here will connect to the horizon server. So the server I spun up in the terminal, when you start the browser, this will create a WebSocket connection. And it will do the handshake, it will do all the things that kind of require this to work. So the next thing we do is, this is just React code. So we say, so in the props, we create a property called horizon, and we say horizon in parentheses React messages. What that does is it literally connects to React messages database table on the back end. So there is, and I'll show you how this works in a second, there is a database table in the back end, right now backed by RethinkDB, called React messages. So anytime someone types a message, that's where the thing gets stored. So on the front end, you say, like, all the messages that I care about, store them in this table, retrieve them from this table. And then we have to do two things, right? Anytime someone types a message, we have to somehow get it stored. And then anytime a message appears in the system, we have to show it to the users. So the remaining piece of code is literally like two kind of paragraphs or 2 lines of code that do the storage and retrieval. And let's look at this here. So this is the save function. What save here does is it says props.horizon, that's the React messages table that we created, .store, and it stores the ID, the date, time, the author, and the actual message itself. So again, you run this on the front end, you say save, and you don't have to write any backend code at all. What this will do is it will take this JSON object, pipe it into the Horizon server will pipe it into the database, and everything will get stored. You don't have to create endpoints, you don't have to worry about kind of all the typical boilerplate code that you generally have to deal with when you're writing these apps. And then on the other side, on the side where a message comes in and you want to display it to the user, is this method subscribe here. So what this does is it says, this is a little bit of a complicated query, but it basically says order the messages by date, time in descending order, get me type 8 messages, and then it says watch. And what watch does is instead of just getting the data once, it says like open a subscription. And then anytime a message shows up, the callback here will get called and it will tell React, okay, there's a new message, let's re-render the UI. This is literally it. So to build this app, this is the only piece of code, or these lines here are the only pieces of code you'd have to write. There's no backend code whatsoever. And then later, as your app gets complicated, you have full database access, right? So it's not like Firebase where you're kind of locked out of the database and this is the only API you could use. You could access the database directly and you can start doing whatever you want. And I want to actually show you why that's important, like why that matters. So we're going to do that right now. So let's see. All right, so what this is the admin console for RethinkDB. So when I spin up the Horizon server, it spins up the database in the background. RethinkDB comes with an admin server that lets you run queries, manage the cluster, do scalability things, stuff like that. This is kind of like, you can think of it as a MySQL admin. If you've ever used that before, it just ships with Rethink directly. So this app here is the admin for RethinkDB. And I'm going to show you how these messages show up in the database real quick, just so you get an idea of like how the full kind of stack integration works. So we've got a database called Horizon. And by the way, so what I'm typing here is a RethinkDB query. I'm not going to go too much into it because the talk isn't really about that. But this is JavaScript. So if you're using Rethink, you can write this. You can like copy paste this into your Node.js application. This will work. But what I'm going to do is access the Horizon database, the React messages table, and then we're going to see what's in there. All right, so let's run this, and the JSON documents here that come back are literally the messages that I just typed. So everything that gets typed in the browser, that's where it gets stored. And what's really cool about this is that the whole thing, the whole system is real time. You don't have to do anything to make bidirectional communication work. And I'll show you an example. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete, so in RethinkDB itself, I'm going to delete all these documents. And the way I do that is by typing the .delete command. And hopefully, I don't know how this works with the internet and stuff, when I run this query, the database will notify the Horizon server that something changed. The Horizon server will notify the client, and all these messages should be gone. So let's give it a try. Bang, and this actually works. This actually works. This is cool. Hey, this is cool. And the reason why it's cool is because like everyone's trying to build these real-time applications, but to deal with WebSockets and piping and the entire infrastructure, like that stuff's really hard, especially when you scale this out. All of this just works out of the box. All right, so now I think I got an ngrok URL. So we're gonna do this the magical, mug sweepstakes, and maybe it'll work this time. All right, so the URL is this. Can you guys see this? This is, no, I will read this out for you. It's 1D5CB 7b5.ngrok.io. And unfortunately, I think the people up front kind of get a little bit of an advantage, but, the world's unfair. Ooh, I screwed this up, but that's okay. We'll figure this out. Ooh, someone's being really bad. I thought of this. All right, we're gonna do this here. Okay, so we got enough names. I'm killing ngrok. That's it. You guys are out. So the names are disappearing, but because we have full database access, we can actually figure it out right here. Here's our table. We're gonna order this by date time. All right. So okay, now's the fun part. So I'm gonna totally mispronounce the names. I'm sorry. That's the all right. This is serious business. I don't even know if it's legal to like give stuff away like this in the state of California, but all right, Sergio. Yeah. If you guys could make this easier and just come up, that'd be awesome. Come up on stage. All right. So I got 4 more of these. So we got Greg V. Hi, Greg. Thanks. Charles. We got Anna. Come up here, Anna. And Matt. Where are you, Matt? All right. Thank you, guys. Hopefully this was fun and exciting. So I don't know how much time do I have? Can someone? Okay. 10 minutes. Okay, perfect. So let me just wrap this up. So the project, again, right now it's in a closed beta, but so the whole Horizon project is going to be open source. RethinkDB is already open source. The reason why we're keeping it closed is because as it's getting designed, we kind of wanted to limit the number of people giving comments just because the initial process of building this project is a very kind of sensitive thing. But I'll just show you the GitHub page. And I got this right here. This is Horizon. This is going to be open source in May. And right now, if you're interested in playing with this, there's about 1,000 people added to this repo. We're kind of throttling it a little bit, but if you want to play with this, go to horizon.io. And just type in your email address. We're going to add you to the GitHub repo. Typically, so the project is still, it's probably still got a few edge cases and kind of bugs here and there. But if you're interested in playing with it and giving feedback and kind of driving the direction and design of this a little bit, we'd really appreciate you joining. It'd be awesome because at this point, like the basic architecture and all the basic features are settled. So just having more people banging on it and giving feedback would be amazing. So thank you guys for coming out and listening to me. But if you have any questions about Horizon or anything at all,
take a couple questions now.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Okay, so the question is, does Horizon take care of the build process? Yeah, so Horizon, so we don't have our own build system, and it integrates with a couple of build systems that are commonly in use with Node.js. I don't actually remember which ones off the top of my head. I haven't looked into it recently. But like, so all the kind of standard components, like build system, the endpoint integration, all of that stuff, it's pluggable. And we are going to ship it with a bunch of plugins for common things. But then the idea is if you want to use a different build system, you could plug that in pretty easily. Yep. The question is, how would authentication work? So I haven't showed this. I haven't showed authentication at all. But it's a great question because everything. So Horizon server, you expose it to the web, and then anybody could run any query. So like in this app, we have no authentication whatsoever. There's an authentication and a security model. The security model is based on the notion of owning objects. So when a user creates an object, I'm just going to kind of simplify this for now, but when a user creates an object, they own it. They're the only ones who can see it. If they want someone else to see the object and modify it, they can share it. So it's kind of based, it's similar to like a Linux security model for files, but it doesn't quite work that well. So the Linux model doesn't quite work that well for this sort of stuff because like there's fundamentally people want to build apps where everything's shared. So it's extended to allow people to do many, many more things, like, for example, create security on queries, things like that. But yeah, there's a model. It's like one way to think about it is it's similar to what Firebase does, similar to what Parse does. It's a fundamentally like similar thing. But yeah, the idea is like when you develop, everything's open. When you flip on the production flag, everything's blacklisted by default, and then you can start opening up objects, tables, things like that for your app and set it up in a way where everything's secure. Oh yeah, so okay, so I was just talking about authorization and you meant authentication. So there's a couple of things. So one is you can authenticate against like all the common providers like Google, Facebook, things like that. When you authenticate, there is a users table that gets created into the database. It's not really a special table, but Horizon has a special API to access it. And then anytime a user logs in or gets on the web page or logs off, there is a presence API, so you could tell whether someone's logged in or logged off. And it works with authorization because you might want to give some people permissions to do that, but not others. Yep. So the question is, how does this play with things like Redux or Relay? So what Horizon does is it exposes a protocol that basically works over WebSockets, and the protocol lets you do basic things like store data, retrieve data. I showed you a semi-complicated query with limits and orders and stuff like that. And then there's a JavaScript client-side API that makes accessing that protocol easy. But there's lots of different kind of ways, competing ways to build front-end applications right now. So Redux is like one way of doing things. There are other ways of doing things. So our plan for this is to have multiple adapters to the underlying API. So the next thing, so the first one, the one I showed you today, is just a JavaScript API that we built. The next thing we're going to build is a GraphQL adapter. So the idea is like, if you're building a React app and you're using Relay and all that stuff, GraphQL is like a really wonderful way of building these apps. And you'll be able to access Horizon through GraphQL. So the third one that we're going to build is Felcore, which is a similar thing, but by Netflix. So there's different ways of, there's different kind of competing technologies, and our goal is to make the backend easy, but we can't really get all the way to the front end. Like we don't want to set direction of how to build front end apps because, Facebook people and Google people and Netflix people are just way better at it because they do it at scale every day. So we're just going to allow multiple kind of competing technologies, to let people build their front end apps the way they want. Yep. The question is, does it support any SQL-like commands like joins? So right now, Horizon is built only on top of RethinkDB. So it works just with Rethink as the backing store. RethinkDB itself does support joins. It supports subqueries. I think it's probably, I haven't looked into this in a while, but I think it's probably the only NoSQL database on the market right now that actually does joins and subqueries. But Horizon isn't really tied to Rethink. Like the reason why we're using RethinkDB for it is because it's the only database right now that does real-time well enough to support this kind of real-time functionality. But there's a bunch of SQL databases, like for example, I think PipelineDB does an extension to Postgres that does this real-time stuff. It's not quite as good yet, but it's getting better. And when the first database, like the first SQL database that does this well, will just integrate into Horizon. So we're not like tied to RethinkDB, but right now it happens to be the only technology that supports the API we need to do the real-time things that people want to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep. The question is, why did the RethinkDB team build this? So, okay, so like the real answer is this. So Rethink is open source. There's a huge community. And we started noticing this thing, like people will go on GitHub and they'll say, hey, I'm using the RethinkDB JavaScript driver. It doesn't work. Like, why isn't this working? And we'd look into it, and what we learned is that people take the RethinkDB JavaScript driver and import it in the browser. And you can't take like the database JavaScript driver and import it in the browser. That doesn't work. You have to import it in a node. So the first time someone did this, we're like, hey, that's not really how this works. You have to import this, in Node.js. They're like, okay, cool. And then another person asked this question, and another, and another. And after like getting 50 questions like this, we're like, okay, maybe there's something there. Maybe we could do something to make this process easier. Because even when beginners, so like what we found is when a beginner asks a question, it may seem like a silly question to ask, but there's always something there, or sometimes something there when you look into it.
Maybe it should work that way.
Yeah, maybe it should work that way. And then we started talking to our existing like bigger customers, and we're like, hey, we're thinking of building this project. Is this interesting to you? And almost everyone was like, yes, we build. So usually the way people deploy Rethink is they'll build one application, deploy the database, and then they start building other applications on top of that data, and they do it all the time. And people are like, yeah, we build these apps all the time. This would be super helpful. So we found that like, hey, our existing customers want this. Our free kind of user community people want this. And that's how it came to be. All right, I think we're done. Thank you again, guys, for coming out. This was fun.
Thank you, man. All right.